What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome back for another episode of Poker Hands. Today we're going to be taking a look at a hand from Live at the Bike that was truly phenomenal. The players in the hand are Garrett Adelstein, a regular at the bike, as well as Nick M. So let's go ahead and jump into the action.
Five.
Fold it.
And Garrett here with pocket aces, aka number one, the Angels. Table talk goes way low, and Nick with pocket kings. The most aggressive player at the table has aces, and you have pocket kings. And Nick's gonna put in the 3-bet. He goes 5x.
Oh, heads up.
5,300 in the pot.
Our hand begins at 100-200 with a $200 big blind ante, and the action folds to Garrett on the button, who looks down at pocket aces. This is one of those rare spots where I only like one option, and that's to raise. Garrett does decide to make it $500 to go. Now the action's over to Nick, who looks down at pocket kings in the big blind. A classic cooler situation. When you open the button and you have a hand as strong as aces or kings, and you're in the blinds and you have the other type of hand, well, you're going to end up playing a large pot regardless of which one you've got. That's just kind of the way the cookie crumbles. But you do get to choose how you lose your money as the guy with kings, and 3-betting here in the blinds is certainly the best play. Back over to Garrett with pocket aces. It's a bit of an interesting spot facing a 3-bet, but we're going to go back to the golden rule of the channel, which is when you have good hands, you should mainly look to bet and raise. I think every now and then working on a call is fine, especially if you think players can be very spazzy post-flop or are way too aggressive. It can be nice to have aces in that call 3-bet range to kind of strengthen your flatting range. However, you do miss the opportunity to stack hands like kings, queens, ace, king, these types of hands that would certainly be jamming pre-flop over a 4-bet. So it's kind of pick your poison. I think as maybe you get a little bit deeper with your stacks, I wouldn't mind mixing this in a bit more often. But on 130-ish blinds here, I think I would much rather prefer a 4-bet. Anyway, Garrett does decide to play it slow, makes the call, and let's take a flop.
And a king on the flop for Nick.
Yeah, no problem. Bet.
And Nick's gonna c-bet 1,700.
Raise it up.
And Garrett's gonna put in the raise to 4,300. Wants to get paid by ace king or king queen or some flush draw, straight draw type hands like queen 10 of diamonds or 9-10 of diamonds. Garrett does have the ace of diamonds in hand, so Nick cannot have the nut flush draw. And Nick with top set just puts in the smooth call.
43.
Pot at 13,900.
The flop comes king, jack, deuce with 2 diamonds, which is an interesting flop. In fact, there are a lot of interesting flops in poker, which is why you should check out upswingpoker.com. These advertisements are just so natural. Whether you're new to the game, a small stakes player, or an aspiring high stakes pro, there's certainly something over on Upswing Poker for you. If you're interested in the best cash game course we have to offer, it's by Educa Poker, who teaches you exactly what strategies he used to become a high stakes crusher and make millions of dollars online. If you're interested in Educa's course, I'll put a link in the description below. Anyway, the flop comes king, jack, deuce. Pocket kings bailed out with a king here on the flop, and the question is now, what should we do? Well, you're going to want to bet this flop quite often as the pre-flop raiser, and I think that this is no exception. I will say that because you have such a strong hand that top pair is now very unlikely, you might not want to use some sizes that you might want to use with, for example, a set of jacks. I would tend to go with a bit more of a smaller bet size here, and maybe once in a while working a check to try and trap my opponent. Nick does decide to go for a 1/3 pot bet here with pocket kings, which seems like the play you should be making the most often. Now over to Garrett with pocket aces. A bit of an interesting situation. You do have the ace of diamonds, so if the turn comes a diamond, you pick up the nut flush draw, which means your opponent is less likely to have a flush draw, and also you have better playability on those runouts. Additionally, because you have pocket aces, it's now more likely your opponent is bluffing. They're not going to have ace king or aces very often at all, and so it's more likely your opponent has some kind of weaker hand, or maybe a hand like king queen. This is a classic spot where I could certainly get behind some calling and some raising. A call is nice because it gives you some strong hands to call down in later streets, you have excellent playability, and you are in position. However, raising isn't a terrible option. You are ahead of almost all of the hands your opponent can have. Yes, you do lose to 3 combos of kings and 3 combos of jacks, and maybe the occasional king-jack suited. But there aren't as many of those hands as there are ace-king, king-queen bluffs, and maybe even some hands like queens or ace-jack that might want to bet 1/3 pot. Garrett does decide to go with the more aggressive option here and raise it to $4,300. And this raise is actually a very interesting spot. Garrett risks $4,300 to win a pot that's fairly large. He's actually getting pretty good odds on this raise, which means Nick is going to have to defend this with a lot of hands. So if Nick did have a hand like ace jack or pocket queens or king queen or anything like that, he's certainly going to have to call this, and he's also going to have to call when he has some of his more reasonable draws. By raising with hands like aces here, Garrett can also use some hands like ace queen, where you have some reasonable removal as well as some decent equity when your opponent calls, or maybe the occasional flush draw, or maybe the occasional hand like queen 10 or queen 9 suited. There's a bunch of other hands that Garrett can look to work in here to balance out his range. Now over to Nick with top set. Bit of an interesting spot. I think if I had a hand like jacks, I would certainly be looking to re-raise most of the time. But with kings, it's a bit more interesting. There's only one king left in the deck, the king of hearts. So if Garrett would be making this raise with a hand like top pair, well, that's way less likely now because there simply are not many kings left in the deck. Additionally, the chance that his opponent has a hand like king jack is much lower because, again, only one king in the deck. When you have top set in these situations, oftentimes it can be a worse hand for value than a hand like middle set because there are less good but not great hands that would be willing to pay you off. On the other hand, if you just call and your opponent is drawing, well, you give them a chance to get there with a variety of holdings. For these reasons, I think I lean towards mixing it up here between calling and raising. I don't really mind if you want to go with more of a call-based approach or more of a raise-based approach. Nick decides to play it slow and keep his opponent in the pot, and let's take a turn.
Check.
Turn is a 3, and Nick checks it over to Garrett. Garrett trying to figure out a precise sizing to get
10 seconds.
max value. Does he go for a big sizing to get a king to call and some draws? Or does he go for a smaller sizing to set up a river shove? That's 7,000, half the size of the pot. Somewhere in the middle, that's what Garrett's thinking.
10 seconds. Call.
The turn comes to 3, creating a backdoor flush draw. We now have 2 flush draws on board, and Nick checks once again over to Garrett. Now, in this situation, Garrett's going to have to bet and keep getting some value. He's definitely ahead of the range of hands that would bet call the flop, and he needs to keep his foot in the gas pedal. Garrett does decide to bet half pot here for $7,000, which sets up a reasonable half pot sized river shove. It's important when you're sizing up flop and turn bets to keep in mind the stacks behind and try to make them roughly equal so that you can have a standardized approach to your sizes in these spots. Now, there will be some textures where you might want to mix that up, but it's a good general idea to try and make your bet sizing roughly equal. Facing this bet with the nuts, Nick once again has 2 great options. He can slow play and let his opponent try to bluff on later streets, or he can raise all in here and try and represent some kind of draw, which he might also want to do if he had a hand like ace queen of clubs or ace 10 of clubs, or maybe the occasional hand like queen 10 suited. Overall, though, given this turn is a brick, I don't think many of your hands should be looking to raise, so I like mainly calling on the turn, which Nick decides to do, and let's take a river. Ouch.
And an ace on the river. 2 outs for Garrett Adelstein, and he gets there. How does Garrett do this? The backdoor flush comes in as well, but Nick does have the king of clubs in hands, so it makes it a lot less likely that Garrett could have a flush. How is this even possible? 27,900 in the pot.
Tie.
Nick Marchington with 15K back. About a half pot size bet.
All in.
Yes, the river is in fact one of just 2 cards left in the deck that could improve Garrett to the lead here with top set. Now the backdoor flush does get in, as well as queen 10, so maybe, just maybe, there's a chance Nick can get away.
All in.
All in and a snap call.
He can't get away. Thank you for joining me today for Poker Hands. If you liked this content, hit the thumbs up button, and I'll see you guys again soon.